I, Cassandra,
I, Cassandra,
in the presence of God and these witnesses,
in the presence of God and these witnesses,
take you, Raymond,
to
be my husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, as long as God gives us life. I, Raymond, in the presence of God, and these witnesses, take you, Cassandra, to be my wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, as long as God gives us life.
To have and to hold. For better, for worse. For richer or poor. To love and to cherish. As long as God gives us life.
Well, how many of you watch HGTV with home makeovers? And you will admit it? Okay, good. I have to admit, I'm an addict, especially during all this quarantine mess that's been going on. I was a Chip and Joanna fan, and then, when they went off to find their own network, which hopefully is coming back soon, I went to Mississippi with Aaron and Ben and watched them rebuild the whole town. And now I'm stuck with reruns and that. But if those of you who watch it, you know what the really favorite day is for guys, right? Demo day, right? Demolition day. We love demolition day because we just love to tear things up, because you have to tear things up before you can rebuild it, right? Well, in construction, the very same thing happens, except that we've come a long way from what it used to be. Right now, they take men who used to be boys that love to blow up things, and they can place dynamite in different spots on a building, and they can blow it up in a way that it just falls right where it is. It's pretty amazing, really, isn't it? But it's boring. If you want to really watch something exciting, you need to watch one of these. These get the job done, and it's a whole lot funner to watch, to watch a wrecking ball as it just piece by piece destroys a building. That's just awesome. Well, the subject that Jesus gets to today is the wrecking ball of home and family life. And today we come to another tough subject, as if last week wasn't tough enough. But we come to the subject of divorce. I told you last week, I shared a story with you from my youth ministry days back in the 80s. And I was a youth minister, and a young lady came to me one Sunday morning, and she was I could tell she had been crying, but she said, "Bobby, my parents are getting a divorce." She was about 14, 15 years old. She said, "My parents are getting a divorce. My mom is moving to California, and my dad is staying here in Texas. And my mom wants me to come with her. I love my mom, and I love my dad." And she said, "Please tell me that there's something I can do besides pray and hope." And no child should ever have to face that decision. It's a tough one. And yet, every day in America, children are having to face that decision. Do I go with mom or do I go with dad? Our former Secretary of Education, William J. Bennett, wrote a book called The Broken Hearth. And this is what he said. He said, "Nothing has done more to undermine family life today than the divorce revolution, which began roughly 35 years ago and is now a prominent and, in the opinion of some, a permanent feature of the American landscape." And it's just interesting. 2/3 of Americans believe now that there's no reason to marry. It has so permeated our country and our culture. What used to be abhorred and basically rare has now become pretty much an everyday thing. And of those 2/3 that are the ones that do marry, 59% of them will say that you probably should do a prenuptial agreement just in case something happens. But what's really heartbreaking is that Christians, their view and their belief about divorce has changed. In fact, George Barna did a survey, and in his survey he found out that Christians are just as likely to divorce as non-Christians. And that 2/3 of those couples that he surveyed said that they felt like divorce was a reasonable solution to an unhappy marriage. Now, I don't know why. It seems like that we're very confused about what God's Word has to say about the subject. Even though we say we believe God's Word, and if we are confused, it's not because God hasn't spoken plainly. He has. And so we're going to go to this moment in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus kind of throws some really hard stuff out there. And he basically says this: if you want to live a good life, you want to live a blessed life, then it involves being committed to your spouse for life. So let's go into Matthew 5 and read what Jesus has to say, and then we'll just kind of talk about it for a little bit. We're going to begin reading in verse 31. And here's what Jesus says. He goes back to the Mosaic law, and he says this: it has been said. So you know this is part of the law. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Tough words from Jesus. Now, if you're here and you have been divorced, you are not under any condemnation or judgment from me. Now, I understand each situation is unique. You can't go back and undo some things. And I also know that God's grace is sufficient to forgive and heal. But I also know that if you have gone down that road, you can attest to some things that I'm going to say today, that you're going to hear today. But if you're here today or you're watching online and your marriage is struggling and in trouble, maybe you're considering divorce, please give me your attention for the next few moments. Because I believe divorce is only an option if you've tried everything else. I know in a marriage it takes 2 to tango. It takes 2 to fight. But it takes 3 to make a marriage strong. Because Jesus Christ has to be in that marriage. And if what I say today saves one marriage, it will be worth it. And if what I have to say today convinces you to make sure to make God a part of your marriage, then it will be well worth it, and our time won't be wasted. But from these verses today, we're going to talk about 2 things that Jesus says you've got to consider when it comes to living this good and blessed life. So if you're taking notes, I hope you are, write these down. If you're online, the notes are there. You can follow along. First of all, Jesus shows us that to live the good life, we must confront the problem of divorce. We can't ignore it. We can't pretend that it's not there. We have to confront the problem. Now, if you don't believe it's a problem, I want you to look at some stats. Now, last week I threw a lot of stats at you because numbers don't lie, and I'm going to throw some more at you today. I want you to look at what Armand Nicoli Jr., Associate Clinical Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard University, writes. He says the divorce rate rose 700% in the 20th century, and it continues to rise in the 21st century. There is now 1 divorce for every 1.8 marriages. Over 1 million children a year are involved in a divorce case, and 13 million children under 18 have one or both parents missing. The United States has 5% of the world's population and yet has half of all the divorces in the entire world. The median duration of first marriages is approximately 8 years, of remarriages between 5 and 6 years, and of third marriages about 3 years. And more than 43% of first marriages end in divorce or separation within 15 years. Now, those numbers alone tell us that there is a problem that we need to confront. So let's look at verse 31 again. Here's what Jesus said. He said, "It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce." Now, Jesus is quoting from Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1, which the Pharisees had interpreted to mean that God not only condoned divorce, but in effect commanded divorce. And that the only thing that was important was this bill of divorcement that had to be given. In other words, if a man decided, and it was a man's world back then, if a man decided that he wanted to divorce his wife, all he had to do was make sure that he filed the necessary paperwork. There was no argument as to whether or not divorce should take place. There was no discussion of what God thought about it. There was just the assumption that divorce was a reality, and this is how it's done. It was all neat, tidy, wrapped up in a legal package called a certificate of divorce or a bill of divorcement. And their mentality then was the same as our mentality. If it's legal, then it must be right. And the easy way out of a marriage was simply a bill of divorcement, legal paper. So you need to understand that divorce was just as hot a topic then as it is today. In fact, later on in Matthew chapter 19, verse 3, the Pharisees came back trying to trap Jesus about this very subject. And look at what verse 3 says in Matthew 19. Some Pharisees came to him to test him, and they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" And the reason they asked that, because there was this school of thought that a man could divorce his wife for whatever cause they wanted. Let me give you some examples. Back in the first century, if a man wanted to divorce his wife, he had some reasons. For example, a man could divorce his wife if she spoiled his dinner by adding too much salt. So, yeah, ladies, you're in trouble. You could divorce your wife if she were seen in public with her head uncovered. You could divorce your wife if she talked with other men on the street. You could divorce your wife if she spoke disrespectfully to her husband's parents. My gosh, divorce would be very rampant if that were the case today, right? And finally, he could divorce his wife if she became plain-looking compared with another woman who her husband deemed to be more beautiful. So ladies, whatever you do, get up and put your makeup on. Just get it done. Crazy, right? In other words, any cause would do, much like today. Irreconcilable differences. Isn't that the big word? Irreconcilable differences. When we serve a God who reconciled us. You see, they saw divorce basically the same way we see divorce today, that it's no longer a sacred covenant, it's just another contract. Do you know that there's a company that has created a unique wedding gift that you can buy and give to young couples? It's called divorce insurance. Yeah, Google it, look it up, it's there. It's just like life insurance. If you happen to be going through a divorce and you have divorce insurance, then they will pay the legal expenses for the divorce. See, that was the mentality then, just as it is now. No different. Somebody said that today marriage starts out as an ideal, and then it becomes an ordeal. And then you start looking for a new deal. But the problem with the new deal is often it becomes a bad deal. people don't have a whole lot of success running from unhappy marriages. Here's some more numbers for you. While 40% of first marriages end in divorce, 60% of second marriages and 75% of third marriages end in divorce. See, what the Pharisees had forgotten was God's definitive statement about divorce in the Old Testament. It goes all the way back to the book of Malachi, chapter 2, verse 16. Look at it. The man who hates and divorces his wife, says the Lord, the God of Israel, does violence to the one he should protect, says the Lord Almighty. So be on your guard and do not be unfaithful. Do you ever wonder why God would make a statement like that? Why does God hate divorce? Well, maybe it's because of what divorce does, first of all, to children. Maybe that's why he hates divorce. You know, there used to be a time, some of you may remember it, when parents would stay together just for the sake of the children. Yet 45% of Christians today say that children produced by unhappy marriage partners should not serve to keep the family intact. And if you're out there thinking about getting a divorce and you do have children, particularly if you have small children at home, think about this. 90%, say that with me, 90%, say it again, 90% of the children from divorced homes suffer from an acute sense of shock when the separation occurs, including profound grieving and fears. It's just like a death. It's like a tragedy. Now, 50% report feeling rejected and abandoned. Half the fathers never come to see their children 3 years after the divorce. And 1/3 of divorced fathers have lost all contact with one or more of their adult children. 37% of the children were even more unhappy and dissatisfied 5 years after the divorce than they had been 18 months after the divorce. What does that tell you? That tells you time does not heal those wounds. Adult children from divorced homes divorce at a rate 4 times greater than kids from homes where there is no divorce. In other words, divorce is not just a social event, it's a disease that gets into the bloodstream of the family. So maybe God hates divorce because of what it does to children, but not only that, maybe he hates it because of what it does to the adults. Listen to this. Divorced men are twice as likely as married men to die from heart disease, stroke, hypertension, and cancer. They're 4 times more likely to die in automobile accidents, and their odds are 7 times higher for pneumonia and cirrhosis of the liver. Now that's the men. Divorced women lose 50% more time to illness and injury each year than the married women, and they are 2 to 3 times as likely to die of all forms of cancer. Both divorced men and women almost 5 times are more likely to succumb to substance abuse. Divorced men have twice the lung cancer rate and 3 to 4 times the rate of genital mouth and throat cancers as do married men. And finally, divorced people are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than married people and have a 40% greater risk of premature death. See, basically, it's a whole lot more healthier to stay together. And by the way, scientific research has shown us that there are really only 2 causes for divorce. 2 causes, men and women. See, Jesus had the courage to confront the problem of divorce, and so must we. If you want to live the good life, don't ignore it. Confront the problem. The second thing Jesus says, if you want to live the good life, you have to confirm the permanence of marriage. Confront the problem of divorce, but confirm the permanence of marriage. Verse 32, Jesus says, this is what you heard, but I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Jesus gives one exception to the rule of no divorce, and that was sexual immorality. The Greek word here is the word porneo. Does that sound familiar to you? You know what we get from that word, pornography. But what it refers to in the Greek is any kind of illicit sexual immorality, whether it's adultery, homosexuality, or incest, anything. In other words, Jesus was against no-fault divorce. He said to divorce for just any run-of-the-mill reason, whether it's incompatibility, financial pressure, personality, irreconcilable differences, unpleasant habits, whatever, it sets off a chain reaction of sin that spreads like wildfire. And you may not like it, and it may make you angry or at least uncomfortable, but Jesus said that wrong divorces lead to adultery. When remarriage occurs, according to Jesus, after a faulty divorce, and that wrong divorce leads to adultery, well, when people have no biblical grounds and enter into another union, they consummate an adulterous relationship. In addition, the man who marries the former wife is guilty of adultery, and the woman who marries the former husband is guilty of adultery, and the husband who divorces his wife for an unbiblical reason caused all of the adultery. And the result is multiplied adultery, according to Jesus. And his simple point was this: unbiblical divorce. So there is a biblical reason, but unbiblical divorce leads to adultery. Now, why is this true? Because of this reason. The only one who can end a marriage is the one who started the marriage, and that's God. Look at what he said in Matthew 19, verse 5, in that same conversation, verse 6, rather. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. You see, here's the problem. We have become totally focused on divorce. Jesus was focused on marriage. When trouble comes, we ask, how do we get out of it? And Jesus says, no, you need to be asking, how can we stay in it? What matters is not man's view of divorce. What matters is God's view of marriage. And he says to be blessed, to have the good life, you need to be committed to your spouse for life. And it goes all the way back to the beginning of the world, Genesis 2:24, when he said, that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. And that word united, that Hebrew word there, signifies a very permanent attachment. In my language, it's gorilla glue. We would say they were stuck together. And when you're stuck together, you can't come apart. You see, couples today, they look at a marriage license and say, well, this is a piece of paper. In fact, a lot of couples use that excuse not to get married. I don't need a piece of paper to prove my commitment to him or her. Let me just show you the hypocrisy in that, okay? If one day you're stopped by a police officer and he asks for your license, would you tell him, I don't need one of those? It's just a piece of paper. No, that won't get you any good place, will it? If you're looking for a job and your boss asks for a resume and you say, I don't need a resume, that's just a piece of paper. You think you're going to get that job? If you're out hunting and the game warden comes up to you and says, can I see your hunting license? Are you going to say, it's just a piece of paper, shoot whatever I want? No. You see, a marriage license is more than a piece of paper. It's a covenant. A covenant made between you and God and that other person. That you will be married for life. Now, I'm not going to ask out loud, but most of you in this room, when you took marriage vows, probably at some point said, "Till death do us part." Well, incidentally, here's some more numbers. When a couple is married in a church, the ratio of divorce drops to 1 in 33 marriages. When couples are regular in church attendance, the ratio drops to 1 divorce in 105. What does that tell you? That tells you need to add a third person to the mix, and that's Jesus Christ. He is the glue that sticks you together. And incidentally, there are other reasons why you ought to stick together. One of the most important investments you can ever make in your life financially is an enduring marriage. A National Institute of Aging survey of 12,000 couples ages 21 to 51 found that married couples are on average twice as wealthy as unmarried couples. And for your own happiness, you better think about sticking it out. 86% of unhappily married people who stay together find that 5 years later their marriages are happier. They just didn't stick it out long enough. 3/4 of people who have characterized their marriages as very unhappy but have nevertheless remained together report 5 years later that the same marriages are either very happy or quite happy. In the words of 2 prominent experts, permanent marital unhappiness is surprisingly rare among the couples who stick it out. Now, I can attest to this personally. Next month, I will have been married 41 years. But I will tell you, the first year of marriage, and my wife will tell you the same thing, the first year of marriage was very, very difficult. And again, I told you when we started this, never thought about divorce, but murder, yes. But we stuck it out. 40 years later, so glad we did. But a lot of people never stick it out, and they never get what I call the sweet spot of marriage, because it just gets sweeter and sweeter. Well, what does Jesus say? And it's pretty simple. Either marry for all of your life, or do not marry for all of your life. And if you feel like you've lost your love for your spouse, listen, there's something you can do. I read a story the other day about a woman who went to her counselor who was very disgruntled with her husband. She couldn't stand her husband. And she basically told her counselor, "I want a divorce, and I think the only way I'm going to be able to do that is to be mean to him so that he will want one as well. What can I do?" And the counselor said, "Well, let's try something. For 6 weeks, I want you to go home, and I want you to tell your husband that you love him. And then I want you to show him that you love him. Think of things maybe you've never thought of before, and just try that. And then when you've got him to the point where he's convinced that you love him, we'll just pull the rug out from under him and just sue him for divorce. And that'll hurt him." So she said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea." So she went home and she started doing what the counselor told her to do. And 6 weeks later, she came back. She said, "Well, I did everything you told me to do." The counselor said, "Great. Let's sue for divorce." And she said, "Are you crazy? I love my husband now more than I've ever loved my husband. We're happier now than we've ever been." And why is that? Just because you've lost the feeling doesn't mean you've lost the love. Marriage is never easy. No one ever said it was easy. You have to work at it. And if you will do like that lady did and go home and love them anyway and show them you love them, I guarantee you, and my wife and I, we talk about this with young couples all the time. I will tell guys, if you treat her like a queen, she'll treat you like a king. That's just the way it is. It's not 50-50, it's 100% both ways. So to live the good life, we got to confirm to the permanence of marriage after we've confronted the problem of divorce. And that all brings us back to where we started. The good life means that you stay committed to your spouse for life. Now, I know there are many here in this room and many of you who are watching who that it's not going to happen for you. It didn't happen for you. And you still remember the pain. And for whatever reason, it may have been the biblical reason, it may have been a non-biblical reason, but you nevertheless did the deed. Well, I want you to know there is grace and there is healing for you. God offers that. Yes, there are consequences. You already know that. And sometimes the consequences you see in your children. And the consequences are sometimes in how you relate to other people. But there is healing. I want you to know that. And God is gracious. And maybe you have divorced for the first, second, whatever time, and you have remarried. Then, okay, let's start where you are. And let's make it a biblical marriage and say that I'm committed to my spouse for life. Now, there may be others of you in this room or watching online that right now your marriage is struggling. I want you to know that there's hope. It's not easy. There may be something you have to stop doing, start doing. You may need counseling. And we are here for that, by the way. But you need to do whatever you need to do to make sure that happens, that you're committed to that spouse for life. And no matter what you're going through, at whatever stage your marriage is in, I can just tell you from this end, after 40-something years, you're glad you did. And I would rather have no regrets when it comes to my marriage and family. God can heal, God can restore. I want you to know that. In fact, I've asked Heath to come sing a song. And it may be where you are right now, struggling. Or maybe you may be even single, thinking about marriage, about to get married. We have some of those. You need to remember everything we've talked about today. And this song is so powerful that no matter where you are in the struggle, you'll find that God can still restore. Listen to this song. It's very powerful.
Nobody's growing old together. We made it easy just to quit. Love has become a negative percentage. Why do we bother to commit? We've got a long list of excuses, ways we try to justify. But I propose to you the truth is, marriage does not have to die. I know you're feeling like it's falling apart, and it can't go on anymore. But God is a God who knows how to heal, so just give it up to the Lord, and He will restore. He said, with this ring I promise, and with I do, she said, forever. But right now, if they're being honest, they don't know if they'll stay together. Let's fast forward to the future. After struggling on their own, They finally figured out they needed Jesus in the middle. Now I'm watching God rebuild their home. I know you're feeling like it's falling apart, and it can't go on anymore. But God is a God who knows how to heal, so just give it up to the Lord, and He will restore. The enemy tries to come and divide, trying to get us to give up the fight. But darkness will always lose out to light, 'cause we got the power of Christ on our side. I see you growing old together. I pray I find a love like yours. So if you're feeling like it's falling apart and it can't go on anymore, God is a God who knows how to heal, so just give it up to the Lord, and He will restore like it was before. You may have strayed off course, but He will restore.
That's true. You may have gotten off course, but He can restore.